Fear of death is natural. At least that's what I've always thought. Actually, the more I think about it, the more I think natural isn't even a strong enough word. Fear of death seems woven into life itself. A rabbit doesn't study philosophy. A deer doesn't contemplate mortality. A bird doesn't sit around wondering whether existence has meaning. And yet all of them behave as if staying alive matters. The rabbit runs, the deer flees, the bird takes off. Every living thing seems engaged in the same project. Don't die. Even plants develop defenses, thorns, toxins, all sorts of mechanisms to avoid being eaten, which is why I've always been confused when philosophers tell us not to fear death. I've heard this idea my entire life. Death is natural. Death is inevitable. Death is nothing to us. Death gives life meaning. Every time I hear these arguments, I find myself having the same reaction. Okay, and? Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe philosophers are talking about something completely different from what I think they're talking about. But the more I think about it, the stranger the whole thing becomes. Because fear of death doesn't seem like a flaw. It seems like one of the most useful things life has ever produced. Think about how old fear of death actually is. Humans have been around for roughly 300,000 years, I guess. Civilization is only a few thousand years old. Philosophy is younger still. But long before there were philosophers discussing death, there were already living things trying very hard not to die. Long before there were books, long before there were religions, long before there were nations, there was already struggle, already avoidance, already self-preservation. The first creature that crawled away from danger was participating in this process. The first organism that developed a defense mechanism was participating in this process. The first life form that resisted destruction was already doing what every living thing still does today, trying to survive. Life itself seems organized around avoiding death. So when a philosopher tells me not to fear death, it feels a little bit like somebody telling a fish not to swim, or telling a bird not to fly, or telling a living thing not to care whether it continues living. That's where I get stuck. So to help me understand it, like any modern human, I asked ChatGPT, what could go wrong? Maybe I was misunderstanding the philosophers. Maybe I had missed something obvious. ChatGPT brought up some of the usual arguments. Epicurus said that death is nothing to us. When we are alive, death isn't here. When death arrives, we are gone. So there is supposedly nothing to fear. And I understand the logic, I really do. But every time I hear that argument, it feels like we're talking past each other. Because when people say they fear death, I don't think they're usually worried about the experience of being dead. They are worried about ceasing to exist. They're worried about losing everything. They're worried about all the experiences they won't get to have, the people they won't get to see, the conversations they won't get to finish, the life they won't get to live. So every time I hear death is nothing to us, my reaction is always the same. I don't think that's what people are talking about. Then there are the Stoics. Death is natural. Accept it. And this argument confuses me even more, because lots of things are natural. Disease is natural. Starvation is natural. Earthquakes are natural. The fact that something occurs in nature doesn't mean we should be comfortable with it. Nature is not a moral authority. Nature doesn't care what I want. Nature doesn't care what any of us want. Nature is simply what happens. So when somebody says death is natural, my response is usually, yes, and? Why should that make me fear it less? And then ChatGPT explained that philosophers are often talking about a specific kind of fear. The fear that consumes people. The fear that keeps people awake at night. the fear that becomes anxiety, the fear that turns into paralysis. And this is where I became even more confused. Because obviously that's bad. Of course it is. If somebody spends every night lying awake in bed, panicking about death, there is a serious problem. If somebody is unable to function because of anxiety, there is a serious problem. If somebody cannot enjoy life because they're constantly terrified of death, there is a serious problem. But I don't think the main issue here is death. The main issue is the anxiety itself. The issue is the paralysis. The issue is the suffering. That person probably has bigger fish to fry than listening to a philosopher explain why death is natural. That person might need therapy. That person might need professional help. That person might need support. Let's be clear about something. Back when those philosophers were living and writing about this stuff, trying to fix these problems, back then people didn't have those modern solutions we have nowadays. There were no medications, there were no therapies, counseling, no things like that. So they were trying to come up with philosophies around death that would alleviate the suffering of the people, the anxiety, the paralysis caused by fear, right? And I find that noble of them. At least they tried to fix it. But what I'm arguing right now is I think we modern humans have been living with those ideas in mind. Those ideas are like a meme. And everybody, I think, most of people at least, are aware of these ideas, these philosophies. Oh, you shouldn't fear death because it's natural. Oh, you shouldn't fear death because death is nothing to us. You won't even feel it. These old solutions have been present, and I don't think they are working anymore. I don't even know if they ever worked. So we have modern solutions for the same problems. We have therapy, counseling, medication. Like I said, I don't even know what else, but you get the point, right? I guess those are better solutions. But like I said, this fear that causes you to lay awake at night and unable to sleep and unable to function normally, unable to do anything, I think that's extremely rare. Like, who does that? If somebody has that problem, then, well, that's a serious problem. They need professional help. But I guess these philosophies, to give them credit, I guess, to not be so harsh, maybe these philosophies might help old people who are about to die, people who have cancer, things like that, right? Maybe then these philosophies are useful to people who know they're about to die and are a little bit scared. Then these ideas might help. But that's the thing, ChatGPT didn't talk about these people. It mentioned those people that are paralyzed by fear, scared shitless to be precise. And my response is, obviously, these philosophies will not work for people like that. They have bigger fish to fry. They need therapy, they need medication or something. So when philosophers tell me not to fear death because fear causes suffering, I find myself thinking, well, sure, but some forms of fear are useful. Actually, more than useful. Necessary. Imagine somebody who is terrified of getting lung cancer. That fear can cause him to stop smoking. That's good. Imagine somebody who worries about heart disease. That fear motivates him to exercise. Great. Imagine somebody who worries about starvation. That fear can motivate him to store food. That's good. Imagine somebody who worries about a future threat and spends years trying to solve it. Maybe he develops a medical treatment. Maybe he invents a safety system. Maybe he discovers a new technology. Maybe he creates something that saves thousands of lives. That's awesome. Fear can be productive. Fear can be constructive. Fear can move people to action. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Human civilization itself may be one giant monument to fear. Fear of hunger gave us agriculture. Fear of cold gave us shelter. Fear of disease gave us medicine. Fear of predators gave us weapons. Fear of disaster gave us engineering. Fear of death may have contributed to almost everything we've ever built. Fear looks more like one of humanity's greatest tools. And then I started thinking about something else. People often say that humans are unique because we can imagine the future. We can imagine dangers before they happen. We can think years ahead, decades ahead, maybe even centuries ahead. And this is usually presented as the source of our suffering, because we can imagine future disasters, future diseases, future tragedies, future death. But why focus only on the downside? The same ability is also one of the reasons we survive. A rabbit can react to danger. Humans can anticipate danger. We can see threats coming before they arrive. We can prepare, we can plan, we can build solutions before the problems appear. We can improvise, adapt, overcome. That's incredible. That's one of the most powerful abilities evolution has ever produced. And yes, it comes with a cost. We can worry too much, we can obsess, we can become trapped in our own minds. Fair enough. But every powerful tool has risks. A hammer can build a house. A hammer can also smash your thumb. The existence of misuse doesn't make the tool itself bad. And that's where I keep running into this wall with philosophy. Because sometimes it sounds as if fear of death is being treated as a bug, a glitch, an unfortunate side effect of consciousness. I don't see it that way. I see it as one of the oldest and most successful adaptations life has ever developed. Without fear of death, there is no survival. Without survival, there is no civilization. Without civilization, there are no philosophers, which creates a funny possibility. The philosophers telling us not to fear death may only exist because fear of death was so effective in the first place. Maybe that's why I've never found these arguments comforting. They seem to start from a premise that I don't share. They seem to assume that fear is primarily a problem. I look at the history of life and see something different. I see fear driving action. I see fear driving preparation. I see fear driving adaptation and survival. And I wonder if we've become so focused on the suffering fear can cause that we've forgotten everything fear has given us. Philosophers might look at death and see an unwinnable war. And because the war can't be won, they focus on acceptance. I look at the same war and see something else. I see that life never seemed concerned with whether the war could be won. Life just fights. That's what it does. Maybe life can't win the war, but it still does everything it can to win battles. A tree grows, an animal runs, a person survives an illness, a civilization solves a problem. Over and over again, life finds itself up against something that threatens its existence. And over again, it pushes back. Not forever, just for a little longer. Maybe that's all we've ever been doing. Buying another day, another year, another generation. And honestly, that seems like enough. We already know how the story ends. The interesting part was never the ending, though. The interesting part is the journey and the friends we met along the way. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, we have reached the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I see you in the next one. Bye.